All right, so GDPR, anyone who does business in Europe probably knows it's a big deal, but it can be really hard to wrap your head around all the rules and regs, especially when it comes to data privacy.
Absolutely. And there's been a lot of talk recently about a new ruling from the European Court of Justice. It basically changes how some of GDPR's rules about data are applied, and it's something any business operating in the EU should definitely know about.
This deep dive is all about breaking down that ruling, figuring out what it means for businesses, and honestly what it means for all of us who live and work in Europe. So let's dive right in. This ruling focuses on a specific part of GDPR Article 14, which is all about transparency and letting people know when you're collecting their data. But the thing is, there are exceptions to this rule.
Right. Article 14 always had some exceptions, like when the data came from a third party, not directly from the person. But this new ruling from the ECJ basically expands these exceptions. It now applies to data that a company generates itself to, which is a pretty big change.
Okay, so think about a business that uses data to recommend products to you based on your past purchases.
Wow.
Before this ruling, they might have had to inform every single customer about how they were using that data. But now,
Now, because that purchase history is data, they generated themselves through those transactions. They might not have to notify each customer individually. It kind of simplifies things for businesses, especially those dealing with huge amounts of data.
so this all started with a case in Hungary,
Yeah.
right? Something about immunity certificates and how data was being used. Can you give us a little background on what sparked this whole discussion?
Yeah, so basically in Hungary, they were issuing these immunity certificates during the pandemic, and one citizen filed a complaint. They argued that the Ministry of Innovation and Technology, which was managing the certificates, was violating GDPR because they weren't transparent about how they were using the citizens' data.
And this complaint went all the way to the European Court of Justice.
It did, and the court ultimately sided with the Hungarian ministry. They ruled that Article 14, those transparency requirements, they don't always apply when a public authority, like the ministry in this case, is using data to perform its own tasks as long as certain conditions are met.
So essentially, this ruling broadens the scope of when a business or a public authority can use data without having to notify every single person.
That's right. And it has a lot of practical implications. For example, companies that do address trading sharing customer data for marketing or data enrichment, adding extra info to customer profiles, they could have an easier time now processing information without triggering those notification requirements in certain situations.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword, right?
Mhm.
On one hand, it could streamline a lot of data processes for businesses, but on the other hand,
Yeah, there are definitely concerns about data privacy and transparency. Just because companies might not be legally required to tell you about everything they're doing with your data doesn't mean they shouldn't. We have to think about the ethical side of things, too.
exactly. So if you're a business owner in Europe, it's super important to stay informed about this ruling and how it impacts your data practices. This isn't just about following the letter of the law. It's also about being responsible and transparent with your customers' data.
Absolutely. And this ruling really brings those ethical questions to the forefront. Now that the rules around data notification are a bit looser, it's even more important for businesses to think carefully about how they use and protect data, even when they aren't legally required to inform individuals.
So as we wrap things up, I'm curious, what do you think this means for the future of data privacy in Europe? Do you think this ruling could lead to more relaxed regulations overall, or is it more about clarifying existing rules?
It's tough to say for sure, but I think this ruling definitely signals a shift toward more flexibility in how GDPR is applied. Of course, data privacy is still a major concern. There will always be rules to protect individuals, but it seems like there's a growing recognition that maybe a one-size-fits-all approach to data notification isn't always the most practical or effective solution.
So for listeners out there, if you're doing business in Europe, or even if you're just someone who cares about their data privacy, it's worth keeping an eye on how this ruling plays out in the coming months and years. It'll be interesting to see how it shapes the way companies handle our data and what it means for the balance between business needs and individual rights.
That's a great point. It's a conversation that's definitely going to continue evolving, so staying informed and engaged is key.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for breaking this down for us today. It's been really insightful.
Of course, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has shed some light on this complex but super important issue. Stay tuned for more deep dives into the world of data and tech.
See you next time.
Bye for now.